Hi, this is Caitlyn Talbert, CF dietitian here at Children's. Today we're going to be reviewing the brief history of CF nutrition and its evolution, review new 2020 guidelines for CF nutrition, as well as provide practical ways to increase calories healthfully. Today I'm going to provide a brief nutrition history of cystic fibrosis, as it has been an integral part of CF care from the time it is first discovered. I thought it would be neat to show how diet recommendations have evolved over time and highlight key discoveries that have brought us to some of the newer recommendations. Generally speaking, traits of cystic fibrosis were first mentioned in the 1700s in German literature. Authors made note of symptoms such as salty sweat and poor weight gain. And initially, it was thought to be some form of celiac disease, which produces an autoimmune response when certain individuals ingest wheat, barley, and rye. However, celiac was also poorly understood given that it was in the 18th century. In the late 1930s, an American pathologist and pediatrician, Dorothy Anderson, published the first description of cystic fibrosis. She was actually the first to connect the fibrosing or scarring found in the pancreas to recurrent lung infections. These findings, of course, help distinguish traits of CF, such as steatorrhea, which is stool with abnormal amounts of malabsorbed fat, from that of celiac disease. The 1930s was also a time before pancreatic enzyme replacement therapy. As I mentioned, steatorrhea was one of those distinguishable symptoms, so in an effort to combat the malabsorption, it was recommended to observe a diet composed of primarily carbohydrate. Anderson, in various early publications, endorsed a diet regimen that was high in fruits and vegetables, a moderate amount of starch, and a diet high in vitamin A. In the 1950s through the 1970s, enzyme replacement therapy was introduced and slowly became an integral part of CF care. However, unfortunately, early formulations of enzyme therapy were poorly tolerated for a variety of reasons. Compliance to this recommendation was sporadic, as parents noticed their children would have poor appetite due to the terrible taste. Originally, enzymes were extracted from hog pancreas and then freeze-dried and purified. In the 70s, an English physician incorporated protein hydrolysate, which is broken down protein, and medium-chain triglycerides, which is a form of fat, in his diet recommendation. These reportedly helped with weight gain and was nicknamed the Allen diet. The diet highlighted importance of higher protein intake. It also included higher amounts of carbohydrate and still recommended low fat due to the fact that earlier formulations of enzymes were still not as effective. In later years, supplement ingredients such as these were routinely used to help maintain or promote much-needed catch-up weight gain. The early 80s marked the advent of enteric-coated enzymes. These enzymes are acid-resistant, which are beneficial because the ingested enzymes are able to survive the super low pH or acidic environment, and then reach the intestine where they become activated. The small intestine is where the majority of digestion and absorption occurs. In earlier formulations, the enzymes would become activated too early, and the calories and nutrients would just pass through the body. This much more effective pancreatic enzyme replacement therapy allowed for more liberal fat in the diet. And so this was the time where the legacy CF diet emerged, one that was high in calorie, high in fat, high in protein, and high in salt. The 80s was also a time where CF centers started to have a more integrated approach and brought RDs, or registered dietitians, on to help them with CF management due to the increasing evidence that better nutrition status led to better pulmonary outcomes. 1988 marked a famous comparison of outcomes between two CF centers, Boston and Toronto. The comparison revealed much better outcomes with the latter center. While there were a few differences that separated Boston and Toronto, it was Toronto's nutrition practices that were said to have been the most impactful, namely their recommendations for high fat, higher vitamin intake, as well as more aggressive enzyme therapy. And then finally to the 2000s. Several studies linked adequate nutrition status, so like weight for length and BMI, with improved lung function. Throughout the early 2000s, more and more states started to implement CF as a part of newborn screenings. This allowed for early introduction of pancreatic enzymes as appropriate, as well as collaboration with an interdisciplinary team, such as registered dietitians, to intervene early and help monitor for appropriate growth, consult for infant feeding regimens, and aid in establishing a positive and encouraging feeding environment. And finally, modulator therapies. Exactly how and to what extent modulators will impact long-term nutritional outcomes is unknown, as the first modulator therapies were studied only approximately 10 years prior. There have been a few very small studies with early modulators, however, that have examined the changes that have occurred within the GI tract and lungs after the medication introduction. Changes in the microbiome or bacteria within the intestines, increased pH, and decreased energy expenditure were observed and thought to have been the biggest contributions with regard to improvements in nutritional status, including both linear growth and weight gain. Last year, the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, which is the governing body of dietitian nutritionists, created updated guidelines for CF nutrition. These documents are reviewed every 5 years, and for the past several years, there really hadn't been any radical changes to recommendations. The overhauling of previous guidelines to promote individualized guidance was, of course, no surprise within the setting of these new breakthrough triple combination therapies. A systematic review of the literature was conducted to develop evidence-based guidelines for the main nutrition issues within CF care. This includes enzyme and vitamin dosing, salt dosing, as well as recommendations for monitoring and evaluating nutritional status through patient anthropometrics, which is weight, height parameters, etc., and lab values, such as vitamin levels and glucose labs. So here are the evidence-based practices that remain unchanged: enzyme dosing, vitamin dosing, salt, fat dosing for Trikafta, and goals for BMI and weight for length percentiles. All right, so enzymes. There is no current evidence to suggest that patients should stop taking enzymes or decrease their current dose unless the team has determined otherwise. This recommendation may change with future research. If and when the recommendation changes, there will likely be a protocol and some degree of monitoring, such as fecal elastase, to ensure any malabsorption is treated. And then vitamins. Even in the setting of CFTR modulators, there is still suspected malabsorption present. So vitamins specifically formulated for CF, which includes higher amounts of the fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K, is recommended. The recommendation remains to have nutrition labs drawn and evaluated at least annually, and then anytime a vitamin change is made 3 months afterwards. This has previously helped to avoid any vitamin deficiencies and will also be useful in the future to avoid any potential elevated serum vitamin levels. The consensus remains unchanged regarding salt supplementations for infants under 1 year. 1/8 teaspoon of salt is recommended for infants under 6 months, and 1/4 is recommended for infants over 6 months of age. Beyond this, the recommendation calls for liberal amounts, which is really frustrating because this is very subjective verbiage. What I like to tell families to do is to pay attention to how their child is feeling around warmer temperatures or increased activity like sports. If your child is observing more headaches, cramping, dizziness, lightheadedness, fatigue, or weakness, this is when you'd want to plan for increased salt intake, like a salty snack or electrolyte beverages around that activity. Fat dosing for Trikafta. The recommended fat gram dose to take with Trikafta is about 8 to 10 grams. Then this suggestion comes directly from the drug company. While one should follow these recommendations, I think it's also important to recognize that most meals have a decent amount of fat in them already. I've heard from some patients on nutrition listservs that patients are taking these modulators with a spoonful of olive oil or adding an additional high-fat snack or meal just to accommodate this medication. And that's typically not needed. So I'd recommend prioritizing a well-balanced meal that includes a healthy fat source taken with enzymes if you're pancreatic insufficient, versus stressing about how exactly to quantify the fat amount. So just to give you an idea, I've provided some examples of breakfasts or snacks that include an adequate amount of fat source, as these are reportedly the hardest for people to troubleshoot. Dinners tend to be a little easier, so I left those out. So I have about 1 tablespoon of peanut butter or 1/4 to 1/3 avocado on whole grain toast. These are also great smoothie ingredients, and these have about 8 grams of fat. Notice how I put intentionally about, because it does not need to be measured out exactly. It should not be a burdensome part of care, just eyeball it. I also have 1 to 2 eggs. You could sprinkle cheese on these. 3/4 cup whole milk yogurt with your favorite toppings, such as granola, berries, etc., or also add it to a breakfast smoothie. You could do a handful of nuts. You can make your own trail mix out of it with favorite dried fruits, chocolate chips. I have about 1/4 cup of hummus on whole wheat pita or veggie sticks. Favorite cereal with about 1 cup of whole milk, or 1 to 2 teaspoons of oil or butter added to oatmeal, or you can use it to cook whatever sort of ingredient you're making, like a egg bake or pancakes. BMI and weight for length percentile recommendations have also not changed. The CF Foundation goal remains to maintain a weight for length or BMI above the 50th percentile, as this has been shown to strongly correlate with improved FEV1 or lung function. It will be very interesting to see if this will be as strongly recommended as it has been with the advent of highly effective modulators. BMI and weight for length percentiles are wonderful pieces of information, but they represent a single point in time. It is important that the RD and care team also take into account weight gain velocity and dietary intake, as these pieces of information help to provide a bigger picture of a patient's nutrition status. For example, the patient on the left is above the 50th percentile but is trending downward. Compare that to the patient on the right who is below the 50th percentile but is trending upward. I would be much more concerned with the patient on the left than the right. So what has changed? First, it's advised to have an age-appropriate, healthy diet that emphasizes culturally appropriate foods with positive health outcomes, such as vegetables, fruits, whole grains, seafood, eggs, beans and peas, nuts and seeds, dairy products and meats, and poultry, as tolerated by the individual. Second, a dietary pattern that is individualized for preferences and nutrient needs, that promotes consumption of nutrient-dense foods, including healthy fats and micronutrients. A diet largely comprised of saturated fat and concentrated simple sugars has the possibility of having negative effects on cardiovascular health. Many dietitian nutritionists are encouraging a transition to more mono and polyunsaturated fatty acids. And then finally, macronutrient distribution. For individuals with CF who are not at risk for nutrition, it is advised to consume macronutrients, so carbohydrates, protein, and fat, in the same percentage and distribution as recommended for the typical age-matched population. There is no current evidence to suggest benefits from modified macronutrient distribution without advanced lung disease and relying on enteral feedings. There are both proposed and known benefits to a high-fat diet for those that require it, including those that are malnourished or not meeting appropriate weight or growth for age. and those who demonstrate significant malabsorption despite optimized enzyme replacement therapy. However, many within the nutrition community caution a high-fat diet prescribed for all when there is increasing variability within the population. So how to move forward when needs are so diverse? How can we optimize nutrition, modulator therapy, or otherwise? I refer to this tool quite a bit when I meet with patients in the endocrine clinic and have started to use these tools more and more in CF as well. This is the Harvard Health Plate. Basically, this is a slightly modified version of my plate, which is the USDA's version. You can see they are quite similar, and I find them to be great tools to teach from. You can really use them in a variety of ways, even if goals are different. Someone who needs a high-calorie diet for weight gain can still have a healthy, well-balanced meal that includes inherently low-calorie items like vegetables and fruits if combined with nutrient and calorically dense foods. So for example, if increased calories are needed, try the following options and notice how they are nutrient dense, meaning they offer health benefits beyond just providing energy. So for the fruit group, cut up banana or apples and pair with nut butters, such as peanut butter or sun butter. You can add full-fat Greek yogurt or cottage cheese to berries or another fruit blend. For the vegetable group, if serving hot, pair with melted cheese or roast an extra canola or olive oil after steaming. If serving cold, pair with full-fat tzatziki, hummus, or nut butters if you're doing something like celery for ants on a log. And then finally, the protein group. You can opt for items such as salmon, which is rich in omega-3s, tuna melts, chicken or poultry. You can take the skin off and then bake in additional oil, monounsaturated or polyunsaturated oils. You could have the occasional lean beef. You can add in an extra egg yolk to a burger, patty, or meatloaf. Eggs are saturated fat, have saturated fats in them, but they also contain vitamins and are a great protein source. So there is some nutrient density in there. Nuts, nut butter, which I mentioned before. So peanut, cashew, or sun butter. You can make nuts into trail mixes and combine with the patient's favorite dried fruits or dark chocolates. Whatever sounds good to the child. And then lentils, legumes, beans. You can buy fat-free refried beans and then add your own oils to it. You can sprinkle it with cheese as well. In summary, we reviewed a brief history of CF nutrition, took a look at new 2020 guidelines from the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, as well as provided practical ways to increase calories in more healthful ways. These guidelines help to provide a framework for expanding upon current knowledge while promoting more flexibility with changing caloric needs. I hope you enjoyed the presentation and I look forward to your questions.